Melania, you in danger, girl. You know that friend that you had got deported? Well, she out of ICE custody, and apparently she on your neck. Melania, what was going on yesterday? You must have found out your friend got out of ICE custody. Now, before we can talk about that speech Melania gave, we have to actually talk about this article by the New York Times. Now, in this image seen here at the 2021 Mar-a-Lago New Year's Eve party, the woman seen there goes by the name of Amanda Ungaro. She's Brazilian, and she was dating that guy by the name of Mr. Zampoli. Well, they were dating for decades. They had a child. He's about 17 years old now. When they broke up, she ended up moving down to Miami and getting married to a Brazilian doctor. She ended up being caught up in some sort of like scheme, like Medicare fraud or something like that, which again, people are starting to speculate that it came from the baby daddy. Well, after she had got arrested, he then called Donald Trump and had her deported to Brazil, her and her Brazilian doctor husband. And then he took custody of their 17-year-old son. The son asked to go to Brazil with his mom, but then was in Brazil, was like, oh, I'd rather come back to the States. So now he's with the dad. Now let's talk about what that has got to do with Melania. Apparently, that girl has been on a crusade because she is an Epstein victim. She stated that she had flew into the United States at 17 years old, on the Lolita Express, child, and she stated that that's when she had met Melania, and then Melania had then got introduced to Mr. Zampoli, or whatever you say his name. She dated him, and then she turned around and dated Donald Trump, referring to Melania. Yes, honey, they was all dating, if that makes sense. Melania was dating Zampoli, then she turned around and dated Donald Trump. That's how they met, okay? Now let's fast forward to Melania's little weird speech she gave trying to separate herself from the Epstein files, right? Apparently, Amanda Yagaro is out of ICE custody. And these are the tweets that she's been putting out since that speech. She said, hello, Melania. I was around you for 20 years, and you know I was inside ICE. And you know what hurts after all this time? I stay close to your family, your mother and your father, not because of you, but because of them at events and everything else. So shut your mouth when speaking about me, because I will expose everything I know. And that's what brings us to Melania's speech. Melania must have got word that she got out of ICE custody. That's what I think. I think Melania found out, ooh, she out of ICE custody. Let me go ahead and separate myself before my best friend say something. Now, other people are speculating that Melania did this speech to separate herself from Donald Trump. Who knows at this point? But I think it has more to do with Amanda getting out of ICE custody. That's what I think it was. And Melania not helping her. But yes, child, this is a mess. Melania, you a mess. And you should have never helped them put your friend in ICE custody. That was foul.
In British Columbia, there's a map of unidentified human remains of various people found across Vancouver Island. There's body parts that have been found but never have been successfully connected to a specific missing persons case. And in British Columbia, but on that island specifically, the amount of people who go missing is insane, and it's not a new thing. Forensic analysis have tracked unsolved disappearances heavily from the 1980s to the present day, some even dating back to the 1950s. What is going on in that island? Let's talk about just one of those unsolved disappearances. It takes us back to March of 1991, when a 4-year-old little boy vanished. Michael Wayne Donahue was born May 12th of 1986 to his parents Crystal and Bruce. He also had a baby sister named Caitlin. At the time of his disappearance, he was only 4 years old, almost 5, with his whole life ahead of him. March 24th was a Sunday, and that day has been on constant replay in Crystal Donahue's mind ever since. She was on her way to a Sunday football game with her entire family. It was a windy afternoon, but a pretty normal Sunday on Vancouver Island, and Crystal was playing in a women's flag football game at Blanchard Elementary School. Bruce, her husband, Michael's father, was also there to watch, and he had Caitlin, Michael's little sister, with him as well. But Michael was a 4-year-old little boy. He really didn't have any interest in watching the football game. He wanted to play. The school playground was right there, just steps away, perfectly visible from the field. Michael's asking to go play. Crystal's hesitating. Meanwhile, she's zipping up his hoodie because it's a windy day outside, and eventually she just gives in. She says, okay, you can go play in the playground. I'll watch you from here. Just wait right there. Do not move, and Daddy will come get you in a second. Michael ran off to the playground, and that was the last time Crystal or anyone who has ever come forward would see Michael Donahue ever again. He disappeared in what felt like seconds. He was last seen around 12:30 p.m. just after the family arrived at the field for the game. Shortly after he went to go play, Bruce went to check on him, and he wasn't there. As soon as Crystal looked over as well and didn't see him, every adult stopped. About 50 people started spreading out looking for Michael, calling out his name. His parents called the police immediately because Crystal just had a really bad gut feeling and she wasn't gonna let any time pass by without knowing where her son went. But it made no sense because it was a school playground. It was Sunday afternoon. afternoon, the area was full of families and people that were there to watch the game. There were people everywhere, and yet minutes passed. They turned into hours, and there just seemed to be no witnesses in Michael's disappearance. Not a single person saw what happened, at least not anyone that has ever come forward. He was just there, and then he wasn't. Pretty quickly, police classified the case as an abduction rather than a missing child's case because of how quickly they noticed that he was missing. And because he was only 4 years old, he couldn't have run off and gotten that far away on his own. And all detectives from the Victoria Police Department were called in. Pretty quickly, tips started coming in, hundreds of tips from across North America. And at that time, they had to be written out on paper and sorted out manually because remember, 1991, there were no digital tip systems, no CCTV cameras on every corner, no Amber Alert. There was only so much they were working with. And when the hours turned into days and then into weeks and then into months, authorities continued following every tip and interviewing possible witnesses around the area. And one detail kept coming up. The only witness report really that police were able to uncover was from someone who described a strange man in his either late 40s or late 50s with a brown van near the playground. A month after Michael's disappearance, police staged a recreation of that day at the elementary school, hoping that having the community walking through might make someone remember an important detail that could help them out in the investigation, but it didn't. And with only a description of a suspicious brown van, eventually the case went cold, and it is still unsolved to this day. In 2006, reports of a man who physically resembled Michael and had been living in British Columbia ever since 1990 came up, but DNA testing confirmed that he was not Michael. In 2009, police in Milwaukee, Wisconsin found a missing persons poster with Michael's face on it at the home of a man named Vernon who had confessed to a psychiatrist that he had information in relation to a missing children's case. But he passed away from natural causes before investigators could fully explore that lead. In 2011, police were notified of a man living in Chase, British Columbia who looked strikingly like Michael, but again, DNA testing confirmed that he was not. But Crystal already knew. She had said, "Show me a picture and I will tell you," saying that she thinks, being a mother, she would recognize her own son. When Michael Donahue was last seen, he was wearing a blue hooded jacket with red lining and red cuffs, a teenage Ninja Turtles t-shirt with multicolored rugby pants and blue sneakers. If he is still alive today, Michael Donahue would be 38 years old, and his family has made it more than clear that they will never ever give up on looking for Michael. And the reason why I wanted to bring attention to this case is not only for Michael Donahue and the Donahue family to keep receiving the attention and the awareness that they deserve, but also because Michael Donahue isn't the only child or person who has disappeared on Vancouver Island in Canada. Children, hikers, tourists, locals have been vanishing on Vancouver Island for decades and at a rate that is more than double the national average, and it feels impossible to get any answers to any of these cases. And obviously so many families have been affected by these disappearances. There are so many questions in the conversation regarding this. Why are so many cases unsolved? What do they have in common? Why on that island? There has been talk of possible cult connection. Some people blame it on the wilderness, others think that it might be the same person responsible who just hasn't been caught. Who knows? But the film that is in theaters today was just released today. It's called Hunting Matthew Nichols, and it's inspired by these events. And I want you guys to know the reason why I think these kind of films are important to watch and talk about, especially this one because it's inspired by these events and that island, is because the more that people know about a case or a location or an unsolved mystery or mysteries, plural, the more likely it is that the right conversation will be brought up and that maybe something will come up that will help solve a real case. You never know these days with the power of social media and technology and films like these that bring awareness. I think it is so incredibly helpful in making sure that unsolved mysteries do not stay unsolved. It's also an incredible film, and I really encourage you guys to watch it this weekend in theaters. But yeah, that is all I have for you guys today. Let me know if you've ever heard of Michael's case or any other missing persons case on Vancouver Island. Let me know if you guys watch Hunting Matthew Nichols in theaters this weekend. I want to know your thoughts on that as well. And yeah, thank you for spending time with me today. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
I live in the Appalachian Mountains, and if you don't know anything about Appalachia, unexplainable things happen here. Everywhere you move, some weird stuff's gonna happen. Like, I just moved out of my creepy old 1800s, used to be funeral home house, haunted house, and moved back to my creepy old haunted family land. I'm telling y'all this story before it gets dark outside because I am genuinely freaked out. Like a lot of Appalachians, I live in a holler, and my house is really close to my mom's house. Like, you could throw a rock from my back door and hit my mama's house. The other night at like 1 a.m., I was leaving my mom and dad's house. They were both already asleep and had been asleep for literally hours. I know everybody in this holler was asleep. Like, nobody was up. I know it was only me. But I get a few steps off of my mom's steps, and I start hearing whistling. So I start walking in the dark from my mom's house to my house, which, like I said, you can throw a rock and hit it. It's not a very far walk at all. I'm walking, I hear a whistle, and I try to pretend like I don't hear it, and I continue walking, and then I hear another whistle, but it sounds different. It doesn't sound like a bird, not that a bird would be whistling at 1 a.m. It almost sounded like somebody trying to whistle a song, and then the second time sounded more like, like the, but long and drawn out and slow and super creepy sounding. I'm not a great whistler, but I'm gonna try to show y'all how it sounded. So the first one was like, then the second one was like, remember, I live in rural Appalachia. There are no streetlights, so you literally can't even see your hand in front of your face. It gets so dark at night. I was using my flashlight, but it literally just lights up like right in front of you. Not sound like a bird. I tried to convince myself that it was my aunt or my uncle because it came from their yard or like their wood line, which is right beside my mom's house. So it was coming from like behind me as I was walking towards my house. There's always been weird, creepy stuff that happens here on this land, but I don't know, it seems like it just keeps getting worse. So living in Appalachia is not for the weak. Mom seems to think that it's the same thing that's been messing with her and pretending to be my dad. Imagine going outside after dark in Appalachia, knowing you're not supposed to, but you have no choice because you have to walk home. You know all the warnings and you know all the rules, such as don't whistle. If you hear something, no you didn't. If you see something, no you didn't. And then you hear something whistling at you numerous times. And like not just like a normal whistle, not a bird whistle, not a human whistle. It was so eerie, like the hairs were standing up on my arms. I don't know how to describe it to you guys. It was so creepy. There's y'all's creepy story for the day. It's really like the least of what we've been experiencing, but it's just the most recent. So let me know if y'all want to hear more stories. Unfortunately, we've had a lot happening recently, so I have a lot.
This is the story of the most unsettling, unsolved murder case in German history. In 1922, deep in the Bavarian countryside, someone brutally wiped out an entire family on a remote German farm with a Mattock, a farming tool, kind of like a heavy iron pickaxe. And then instead of running, the killer stayed on that farm for days, eating their food, feeding their animals, keeping the fire burning like nothing had happened at all. And to this day, over 100 years later, no one knows who did it. So on a lonely little farm called Hinterkaifeck, tucked behind a dense stretch of forest on the edge of a small Bavarian village, lived a family of 6 people. You had the head of the household, a 63-year-old man named Andreas Gruber, his 72-year-old wife, Kazalia, and their daughter Victoria, who was 35, widowed, and raising her 2 younger children on the farm alongside her parents. Those children were a 7-year-old girl, also named Kazalia, and a 2-year-old little boy named Joseph. And then the 6th person living in that house was a maid, a woman named Crescent Rager, who had been hired to help run the household. And Crescent was the first person to say out loud that something was very wrong inside that house. See, as Crescent went about her work each day, cleaning the rooms, working in the kitchen, moving throughout the halls, she kept hearing these sounds coming from the attic. And at first, she probably tried to push it out her mind, because old farmhouses make noise, and she didn't want to be the woman who got spooked from a creaking ceiling. But the longer she stayed, the harder it became to explain, because what she was hearing wasn't just creaking. It moved from one end of the ceiling all the way to another, the way someone's foot move when they're pacing back and forth up there in the dark. And the moment she'd stop what she was doing and call out, "Hey, is anyone there?" it would go completely quiet. It was like whatever was up there knew she was listening. This happened over and over, the footsteps, the sounds she couldn't explain. And after months of this, Crescent had genuinely convinced herself that the farmhouse was haunted, that something was always watching her. So one day, pale as a ghost, she packed her bags, walked out the job, and never came back. Now, when Andreas heard all of this, he was not impressed at all. Partly because now he had to scramble to find a replacement maid on short notice, which on its own is a whole headache. But more than that, he flatly refused to entertain what Crescent was saying. As far as he was concerned, she was just an anxious woman who allowed the isolation of the farm, the creaks of the old beams, the pressures of hard work, get in her head. It was nothing more than a nervous woman looking for an excuse to quit. But even after she left, the weirdness didn't stop. In fact, it got worse. A few months later, Andreas was standing in the yard when he spotted something lying on the ground that shouldn't have been there at all. A newspaper he didn't recognize and didn't remember buying. He figured maybe someone in the family had left it outside, so he went around asking his wife, Victoria, everybody, but they all said no. And when he looked more closely at it, he could see that it was printed from Munich, which was a city roughly about 45 minutes away. A city none of them recently visited or had any real connection to, which was weird. So Andreas decided that the most reasonable explanation was that the postman had dropped it off at the wrong address. And so he went and asked him directly, only to be more confused when the postman swore up and down that this was not his. Now, most people would have been deeply alarmed by this, but Andreas just chalked it up as something weird and moved on with his day. But then something happened that was a lot harder to just wave off. Just days before the murders, there was a snowstorm, and as Andreas was walking the property the way he always did after bad weather, he looked down and stopped cold. There were footprints pressed into the fresh snow. A single set of tracks coming straight out of the woods and leading directly up to the door of the machine room. And something about the way they just ended up there made his stomach drop a little, because the tracks only went one way, into the farm, not out, which meant that whoever had walked in from those woods had not walked back out. And when Andreas followed that trail to the door, he saw that the lock had been busted open, like someone had forced their way inside. He stepped in, checked every corner, looked behind the tools and equipment, and listened for any movement, but there was no one. And once again, when faced with all of this, Andreas decided to not call the police. He kept it to himself and tried to push forward, even though everything was pointing to one thing: someone was clearly on his farm. That same night, as he laid asleep in bed, he was awoken by this strange, inexplicable noise, a low, rhythmic thudding sound coming from the attic. And the more he listened, the more it sounded like footsteps. Now, Andreas wasn't a man easily rattled, but lying there in the dark with that sound pressing through the ceiling above his head, even he couldn't fully push the feeling that somebody was up there. So he got himself out of bed and went to check. And as he swept his eyes left to right of every corner in that attic, he saw nothing. And so, thinking it was probably just the wind or something, he went back to sleep. Not long after that, on March 30th, 1922, just one day before Andreas and his whole family would be murdered, the house keys suddenly went missing. Andreas turned the farmhouse inside out and couldn't find them anywhere. And while he was searching, he found something else that stopped him. Fresh scratches on the iron lock of the tool shed. These thin, sharp gouges of metal that had not been there before. It was as if someone had recently tried to pick it open. By this point, Andreas had started complaining to the neighbors about everything: the footsteps, the broken lock, the newspaper, the missing keys, the scratches. And the neighbors looked at each other and basically said, "Look, remember the maid who said the place was haunted and she quit? Well, maybe she wasn't as crazy as you thought she was." And a few of them even offered to help him. Multiple people said, "Look, let's just call the police. Let us come over there. Here, take this gun." And Andreas, being the kind of man that he was, turned every single offer down. Maybe it was an ego thing, who knows? But for whatever reason, he refused to accept any help. But if he would have known what was coming, if he could have seen what the next 24 hours would bring, not just for him, but for his wife, his daughter, his grandchildren, I truly think he would have grabbed every single one of those offered hands and held on until someone arrived. Because on March 31st, 1922, one day after the keys went missing and the scratches were found, the person who had been living in that attic, crouched in the dark directly above this family's heads for weeks, finally came down. They quietly moved through the night and into the barn, and they waited there in the dark, holding on to that mattock that had been stored on the property, that heavy iron farming tool. And one by one, in a way that nobody knows how, they lured members of the Gruber family inside. The moment each one of them stepped through the darkness of that barn, the killer struck them in the head. Andreas went first, then his wife Kazalia, and then Victoria, and finally Victoria's 7-year-old daughter, little Kazalia. When it was over, the killer stacked all 4 bodies on top of each other and covered them with hay and an old wooden door, and walked back through the stable and into the house. In Victoria's room, 2-year-old Joseph was still in his crib, and the killer delivered a single blow and kept moving. And then the killer made their way to the very last room in the house, where a woman named Maria was most likely asleep. She had just arrived that afternoon for her first day as the new maid, and on that very same day she got this job, it would be her last. And just like that, 6 people lay dead on that farm. And when it was over, the killer didn't run, didn't panic, didn't disappear into the night the way you'd expect someone to after something like this. Instead, he did something that honestly still doesn't make sense even 100 years later. He moved in. While 6 bodies laid cold in that barn, the smoke kept rising from the chimney. He cooked their food, he fed their cattle, and slept in their warm beds like the farm was his. And the question that has never been answered, not by investigators in 1922, not by the detectives who reopened this case decades later, not by anyone, is who is this person and why? If you have any theories, please drop them in the comments. I genuinely want to know what you think. And as always, just like my sweater says, group hug.
So hang on, she went on the news to talk about her missing friend and then she vanished too. Before we get into today's case, if you guys like deep dives, I post a brand new episode on my podcast, The Born Investigation, every single week. It was 8 a.m. on the 9th of January 2002 in Oregon City. 12-year-old Ashley Pond and 13-year-old Miranda Gaddis were school friends. Ashley was a real cool girl. You'd always see her in like baggy sweatshirts and jeans, and she loved R&B and hip-hop. Miranda was just a really lovely, sweet girl. Her family absolutely adored her. That particular day, Ashley was running late for the school bus, but she did eventually make it out of the door. Her bus stop was only 10 minutes from her home, but on the way to the bus, it seemed like she had vanished into thin air. Her mum ended up phoning the school later that day when Ashley failed to come home, and the school were like, no, she's been absent all day. She never even arrived. Understandably, her mum's heart just stopped. What do you mean? Obviously, word soon spread that this young girl was missing, and the media swarmed the area like bees. Police were out in full force. There were search teams everywhere, but nobody could work out what the hell had happened. There was also absolutely no reason for Ashley to want to run away of her own accord. She was very, very well liked. She was involved in loads of teams at school, swim, dance. She was a happy girl. And as the media were all kind of battling to get the best story here, they came across her best friend. This was Miranda, and they said to her, like, talk to us about your friend. What's gone on? Why is she missing? Miranda started speaking to the media, having no idea she was about to meet the same fate. Months dragged on with absolutely no news about Ashley, and every single day her family's hearts were breaking, having to go on another day without her. They kept saying to police like, hello, why aren't you doing anything? What's going on? Until the 8th of March, when chillingly Miranda also disappeared under suspiciously similar circumstances. It was like a carbon copy of Ashley's disappearance, 8 a.m. on the way to the school bus. This was no coincidence. This was very calculated. Something evil was lurking in that community, and the locals were understandably horrified, like, who was next? They even aired an episode of Unsolved Mysteries, including the girl's case. Once again, it was like police had absolutely no leads, nobody had seen a thing. They'd literally vanished without a trace until a phone call came into police. It was August by this point, and the guy on the other end of the line was like, I want to report my dad. He tried to my 19-year-old girlfriend. Now, already this is clearly wild. This was a very disturbing report, but it was about to get a whole lot darker than anyone expected. This dad was Ward Weaver. He knew the missing girls. He'd actually gave them lifts to school sometimes if they missed the bus, because they were apparently friends with like his younger daughter. As you can imagine, again, the media swarmed the area. They were all over this guy. They were like, okay, he's clearly a wrong-un and he likes younger girls. He was a bit of an Ian Huntley. He seemed to be kind of enjoying the media attention, almost welcoming it. He even agreed to have this weird interview in his own home. Like, a reporter went round to his house and he admitted on air that he was the prime suspect. And people noticed something very chilling in the footage. There was an area of his garden that had brand new, freshly laid concrete and a strange smell reported by neighbours. The heat was on this man big time, and word got out that he was planning on running away. So police swooped in, they arrested him for the art of the son's girlfriend and fully searched his house. And his son had some more deeply disturbing news about Ward Weaver. He said, "My dad has now admitted to murdering both of the missing girls." And the whole family was adamant. They were like, "Guys, you need to dig up that concrete." So the FBI sealed off the property, and lo and behold, they announced what the whole community had feared. This man had gained the girls' trust, he'd given them lifts to school, and he'd buried their remains on his property. Ashley was in a cardboard box in the shed, and Miranda was beneath that concrete. But wait until you hear what police missed. This man had a history of violence against women, and Ashley herself had even been to the police and reported that this man had R''d her. But police chose not to press charges. Ward ended up pleading guilty to the murders and got 2 life sentences without parole. And it must be in the family, because it turned out that his stepson was convicted of murder in 2014 for killing a substance dealer, and Ward Weaver's own dad was on death row for murdering 2 people.
This is the exact spot where 3-year-old Rachel Runyon was kidnapped 44 years ago. She was playing at the park with her brothers when a man walked up to them, led her away with the promise of bubblegum-flavored ice cream, threw her in the back of his car while she was screaming, and drove away. Her body was found 24 days later in a stream 50 miles away in Mountain Green, Utah. To this day, her killer has never been caught, and chances are he's hurt many more kids since her abduction and murder. I don't live very far away from this location, so this is one of those cases that really weighs heavy on my heart. And since this is one of Utah's most chilling unsolved cases, let's talk about it. This is Rachel Runyon. She was only 3 years old when her life was tragically taken from her in 1982. Her mom and dad are Jeff and Elaine, and right before Rachel was born, they moved to Sunset, Utah from Tennessee. At the time, only 6,000 people lived in Sunset, so Rachel's parents thought that it would be a super safe place to raise their kids. Rachel was the middle child. She had one older brother named Jason, who was 5, and one younger brother named Nathan, who was 18 months. They were a really happy and young family, and Rachel was a child beauty queen. Her mom entered her into a last-minute contest, and she won the title Little Miss Sunset the year before her murder. And Rachel was described as a really well-behaved little kid who loved to belly laugh. They lived adjacent to Doxey Elementary School and Mitchell Park, and one of the kids' favorite things to do was play at that park and the school's playground. They loved it so much that in the summer of 1982, the Runyons actually installed a gate door in their backyard fence so that the kids could easily access the park. Elaine never let her kids go to the park alone though. She was pretty much always with them. Although Sunset was generally a safe area, she still taught her kids about stranger danger just to be safe. But on August 26, 1982, Justin and Rachel asked if they could take their little brother to the playground, the one right in front of their house. Elaine almost said no because she was in the middle of making everyone lunch, so this meant that the kids would have had to go alone. Like I said, she never allowed this, but the Doxey Elementary playground was literally just 15 feet away from their backyard, and Elaine could see them from the kitchen window, so she agreed and let them go play for a little bit unattended. She kept her eyes on the kids and even cracked the window a few times to talk to them, and at first, everything was fine. The kids were all playing in the sandbox and having fun like usual. But then 12:55 p.m. hits, and this is when Elaine is officially done making lunch, so she yells outside for the kids to come back, but only 2 of her kids return, 5-year-old Justin and 18-month-old Nathan. Rachel was nowhere to be found. Then, Justin blurted something out that would forever change the Runyons' lives. Someone took Rachel. He said that she was taken literally just seconds before by a man who offered to buy her bubblegum-flavored ice cream at the nearby supermarket. Justin said that they were first approached by the man when all 3 of them were playing in the sandbox at Doxey Elementary School, and the man tried luring all of them to his car by offering to purchase them candy. He stayed and talked to the Runyon kids for about 15 minutes before they all got up and walked across the parking lot to Mitchell Park, which was the one right behind their house. But as they got closer to the man's car, Rachel told him that she really loved bubblegum-flavored ice cream, to which the man replied, "Perfect, I have that flavor in my car." Justin tried telling Rachel not to go with this creepy man, but just as Rachel turned to continue walking, the man picked her up forcefully and shoved her into his car as she was screaming. Justin said that Rachel couldn't get out, and then the man drove away as he stood there, frozen in fear. I mean, can you imagine watching this happen to your little sister with no way to help because you're also just a little kid? This is when he and his brother came home to tell their mom what happened. Elaine asked Justin what this man looked like, and he said that he was a light-skinned African-American or Hispanic man who had a mustache with a gap in it. He was around 6 feet tall, maybe around 30 years old, and he drove a blue car with wood grain stripes down the sides. So Elaine rushed to the nearby supermarket where this unknown man said he was taking Rachel, and she asked everyone in the store if they'd seen a, quote, 3-year-old little blonde girl with a black man. end quote. But nobody had. They never even saw the car in question, so it was clear that the man was obviously lying and never took her to the store to get ice cream. Within 20 minutes, Elaine reported Rachel missing to the Sunset Police Department, and right away, a massive search began. Authorities set up roadblocks all throughout the city, and a big team was assembled which included several officers from different nearby counties. But it was like Rachel vanished into thin air. They also didn't have much to go off of evidence-wise. There were no cameras at Doxy Elementary or any working cameras nearby, so no CCTV footage was available. This meant no concrete photo evidence of the suspect, and there was no evidence left behind at the playground either, so this kind of stunted the investigation a little bit. But then a witness came forward claiming to have seen the abduction. It was a 10-year-old kid who witnessed this, but that's not all. This kid said that they were also approached by the suspect this same day, literally just moments before Rachel's abduction. This kid was at Mitchell Park, the park that was pretty much in the Runyon's backyard. The man was seen talking to several kids at this park, including the witness, and drinking coffee just watching them. He hung out there for about 15 minutes before walking over to Doxy Elementary, where he then talked to the Runyon kids for about 15 minutes, and then, as we all know, he abducted Rachel. So this kid was able to give police a pretty detailed description of the man. He was a light-complexioned African-American, around 30 years old, and he for sure drove an older model 4-door dark blue car with wood grain stripes along the sides. Justin's description was pretty similar, but the hair description was off. And according to Justin, he thought that the man could have been a light-skinned Hispanic rather than African-American. So some things were a bit off, and he even asked authorities to make those changes when drawing the composite sketch. But they told him that they were sticking with the 10-year-old witness's description because he's, quote, older and knows better. End quote. Which is infuriating because Justin was up close with this guy for a long period of time. I know he was 5, but he literally watched this man kidnap his sister. So anyway, police released this composite sketch to the public, but they were super limited in what they could do in the investigation since there was hardly any evidence of what took place. So they did what they could. Go door to door in the neighborhood and knock, and quietly hope that someone would come forward and confess more information. They relied heavily on the public, issuing a lot of press conferences, and the neighborhood really came together to help the family out. They donated a lot of money to continue searching, and they even assembled a neighborhood search committee. Together, they distributed thousands of missing person flyers, so it didn't matter where you lived, you knew Rachel's name and saw her picture. But within 3 weeks of this alone cost the Runyon family $10,000 in just postage fees alone. I say this just to give you guys an idea of how expensive something like this is for the families of missing or murdered loved ones. I mean, outside of dealing with the stress of the investigation and the awful grief, they're then expected to pay huge fees like this just to keep their stories out in the public eye. At one of the press conferences, Elaine acknowledged the possibility that Rachel was sold, and she pleaded for anyone who was going to be adopting a little girl in the near future to double check and make sure that it wasn't Rachel. So they were really coming at this from any angle possible for hopefully some type of answer. But sadly, 24 days later, they would finally have some answers. It just wasn't the one anyone was hoping for. On September 19th, 1982, a family was driving down this really remote road in Mountain Green, Utah. This is a really mountainy area and about 50 miles from Sunset where Rachel was last seen. The family stopped their car at the turnout near Trappers Loop Road to let their kids out so they could stretch their legs and play a little bit. So the kids went over to a nearby stream and started throwing rocks in the water, but something quickly caught their eye. At first they thought that it was a doll in the water near a pile of brush, but as they got closer, they realized that it was actually the body of a little girl, floating face down. She was nude and had been hogtied. The little girl was almost unrecognizable due to the advanced state of decomposition, but Elaine was brought in who confirmed the worst possible news. This was Rachel. She knew immediately by a chipped tooth and the earrings that she was wearing. Because of the state of her body, authorities couldn't determine a cause of death, just that she was in fact murdered. It's been reported that there was some evidence found near her body that was suspicious, but multiple DNA tests came back as inconclusive. Rachel was eventually buried in the Washington Heights Memorial Park with her favorite Raggedy Ann doll. Her gravestone is inscribed with the words, quote, "She brought a nation to its knees." End quote. The detail about the Raggedy Ann doll makes me so incredibly sad and brings me to tears because I also have a 3-year-old little girl and I cannot imagine burying her like that with her favorite stuffy. It's just devastating. So now that her body was found, police shifted their focus to finding her killer, but somehow he got away. To this day, police have never been able to track him down and her murder remains unsolved. There have been 2 suspects though, but they have never been named publicly. The first suspect came to light in 2007. This man apparently now lives in New Mexico, but Sunset police say that there is evidence supporting his guilt, but I guess not enough for them to make a formal arrest. At a press conference, Rachel's dad Jeff looked into the camera and addressed this man. He said, quote, "We know you, and we know you by name." End quote. He went on to say that he knows this man is responsible because his own sister turned him in, and then certain evidence was found in his car that tied him to Rachel's case. But this person, who again has never been publicly named, threatened to kill his sister if she didn't take back her statement, so she did. Thus, he was never formally charged. But according to police, this man still remains a suspect to this day. I guess they're just waiting for him to slip up or for someone to rat him out. Another possible person of interest came to light in 2012. He was a prison inmate in Pennsylvania who just so happened to live in Sunset in 1982, not far from where Rachel disappeared. But he too has never been charged because of the lack of evidence. The Runyons have said in the past few years that they have some ideas about who might be responsible and are working with authorities, but still, whoever did this has never been caught. In 2022, a woman came forward anonymously and claimed that her uncle killed Rachel. She also never publicly named him, but she said that her brother and Rachel's brother were in the same class at Doxy Elementary. The woman went on to say that everyone in her family was aware that her uncle could have been the one to do this, even going so far as to say, quote, "I wonder if they've ever looked into insert uncle's name." End quote. Her uncle was reportedly a sexual predator and even drove a car similar to Rachel's killer, which police now believe is a dark blue 1973 Ford Pinto Squire station wagon with wood grain stripes down the sides. But her family ultimately dismissed this theory all those years ago because it was widely pushed that the suspect was African American, not Hispanic like the uncle was. So they let it go and figured that it couldn't be him. The woman tried telling police this, but they never returned her calls. So she took it to the media and a local PI that's been working on Rachel's case with her family. Apparently all of this evidence is circumstantial, but I guess it's now back on the police's radar. So hopefully a thorough investigation will provide some answers. But nonetheless, police believe that whoever killed Rachel either lived in the community or had strong ties to Sunset. And they also believe that this wasn't his first nor his last crime against children. One of the major ways that this case could be solved, though, is through today's advances in forensic technology. I mean, so much has advanced and developed since 1984 when DNA testing first became a thing, and authorities have even said that they are open to exhuming Rachel's body to do some more testing. As a result of Rachel's murder, though, there have been some positive changes to the law, mainly thanks to her mom, who became a huge advocate for child safety. In 2002, the state of Utah formally implemented the Rachel Alert, which is a child abduction alert system. So once law enforcement verified that a child was truly abducted, a Rachel Alert form was faxed to all TV and radio networks for immediate and high-priority statewide broadcast. This alert system was actually used in the 2002 kidnapping of Elizabeth Smart, and then again in the 2003 kidnapping of 3-month-old Nicholas Triplett. Both Elizabeth and Nicholas were found alive, and I'd like to think that if this system existed when Rachel went missing, that she could have been found alive too. Eventually, the Amber Alert was created, so Utah, as well as the rest of the nation, ended up switching to that alert system instead of the Rachel Alert. And in Utah, the Amber Alert is tested twice a year, and one of those dates falls on the anniversary of Rachel's abduction, which I think is a good way to honor her. What's also super cool is that Utah residents will receive the Rachel Runyon Award if they help recover a child after an Amber Alert is activated. I've lived in Utah for 5 years now, and I just learned this, and I think it's such a good way to keep Rachel's story alive. Rachel's case also played a huge factor in the passing of the Missing Children's Act, which puts descriptions of missing children in the FBI's National Crime Information Computer database. And lastly, in 2017, the Rachel Runyon Missing and Exploited Children's Day was put into effect, which falls every year on the date of her abduction, August 26th. This day highlights other missing children within the state. If you want some more information on this case and want to support Rachel's family in uncovering the truth, you can visit their Facebook page called Justice for Rachel Runyon, which I believe is run by her mom. It's incredibly inspiring to see how hard she's fought for her daughter, but I also want her to know that she isn't alone in this fight. We care about her and her daughter's story. I've taken my daughters to the Doxy Elementary playground a handful of times, and I recently walked over to the memorial park named after her. It was so surreal to be standing in the exact same spot that this happened in so many years ago, yet we still have no answers. If you have any information about the unsolved murder of Rachel Runyon, please contact the Sunset Police Department. But it's now been 44 years, and whoever took Rachel from the park that day and destroyed so many lives in the process remains a mystery.